I think the story of Saint Monica, the reality, the life of Saint Monica, is very, very relevant today. Now, she lived in the 4th century, so born around 331, 333 and around. So the church was still young. The church was still growing. It wasn't quite as international as it is now, although it had spread across a good share of Europe and over to the east, over towards India. But there were still struggles. There was still an awful lot of paganism. The Roman Empire hadn't, as such. Hang on, the Edict of Milan was 315, so the Roman Empire was fairly Christian at that point, or at least the empire was. If that had actually spread into the hearts of the individual people, that still took time. But there was still a lot of missionary work to do, basically. And Saint Monica had the great challenge. It's so difficult, as we all know, to convert people in your own family. Whatever about mission out there, okay, let's go off to Africa. Great. And any of you who have ever been there, there's such an openness and such a willingness and such a joy. I remember even a friend of mine went over to volunteer for a year in Africa, and she said she was volunteering teaching. And she said to the kids, okay, today we're going to do some writing. And all the kids are like, yay, writing, I love. So they get their little chalkboard, and their bit of chalk, and they're doing their letters. I love writing. Whereas in an Irish school, so kids today we're going to write. No, I hate writing. Can I just type it or something, because it's just way easier. And it's similar with the faith. Very often today, anyway, there's still such a joy in the reception of the faith. Mission can often be an awful lot easier, or at least maybe we can romanticize that it's easier out there. But mission in your own family is an awful lot harder. Like for parents, when they see their kids not practicing, that is difficult. It's difficult because they're not really under your wings anymore. They have to eventually fly the nest. They have to eventually get their own lives together and do their thing. So you have a certain amount of influence on them, but not like you did when they were 6. So it can be very, very difficult for parents, for moms especially these days, to see their children not practicing. Young adults, maybe even with young families, and not practicing. So this is Saint Monica's story, 17 centuries ago. Very same thing. So she marries a guy named Patricius, so Patrick actually, Patricius, and who was a pagan, so wasn't practicing. And she prayed, and she prayed, and she cried, and she cried. And not only then did she have to deal with her dear husband and his somewhat angry moods, but he inherited that anger and impulsiveness from his dear mother, who moved in with them as well. So then you had Monica, who had to deal with her husband and indeed the mother-in-law. So she was praying for them both, and you can just imagine, when you're in that environment all day, every day, you're just surrounded by it, and the constant kind of chipping away at your faith, and the constant, when she wanted to go pray or go to mass, whatever it was, and it's the constant, you have to do that, why are you doing wasting your time, it's a cult, it's all stupid, it's all a waste of time, whatever, but to be on your own in that environment is tough. So she prayed, she continued practicing, she immersed herself in the heart of the Lord. And then her children, she has 3 children, and St. Augustine becomes before he was St. Augustine, so little Agostino became very, very wayward, very exceptionally smart kid, but wayward, headstrong, and ended up going to studying in Carthage, and then came across what's now known as a heresy, Manichaean heresy, so the Manichaean faith. So it's a bit dualist. It doesn't see God as omnipotent. It sees the created world as a consequence of the fight between this not omnipotent God and kind of an equal and opposite evil force. So it's kind of confused in its ideas. But St. Augustine, that's what he was into. That was the faith he belonged to for a time. You can just imagine then, again, back to St. Monica's poor motherly heart, and she looking at this thinking, have I failed? Is it my fault? What could I have done? Maybe I should have. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should never have sent him there. Maybe I could have prayed more. I could have sacrificed more. All the what ifs. Very, very difficult, and again, very actual. So she prayed and continued to pray. Augustine eventually came home, back to Italy, and they heard Saint Ambrose preach in Milan, and something just clicked with Saint Augustine, that the way Saint Ambrose spoke with such conviction, with such love, and obviously, like Saint Augustine has a very systematic mind. He's not exactly as definition oriented as maybe Saint Thomas of Aquinas. He's a lot more poetic, but still very, very sharp mind. So hearing Saint Ambrose, he could not just see like the faith of the man, the enthusiasm of the man, but that what he said made sense. He was talking about a God who he seemed to know, whose actions were coherent with what he was saying. It all just seemed to slot together. And so there was a moment of enlightenment when those doors opened, the doors of his heart opened. And very quickly then St. Monica's prayers were answered. Patricius, her husband, only converted very close to his death. So there was a long slog there before he converted. And indeed his mother too. Her prayers were answered, but not quickly. But they were answered. And maybe that's kind of how it works. I mean, St. Monica in heaven looking back from her heavenly glory, with her husband at her side and getting the chance now to spend all eternity with her mother-in-law, delightful as she is now, she wouldn't, it's easy to say, but looking back, she wouldn't regret for a second any of the sacrifices, any of the tears, any of the prayers, any of the difficulties that she went through this side of eternity. Now that she's up there, she's up there, 17 centuries now, so she's only settling in. She doesn't regret for a second any of those sufferings, and of which there were many. And at the time, they're hard. Like 20, 30, 40, 60 years of that, not easy at all. But when we get to heaven, things start to make sense. We see how those obstacles, that adversity purifies my heart. It teaches me perseverance. It teaches me faith. Continue praying even though you don't see the fruit. After 1 year, you don't see the fruit. Keep praying. After 2 years, you don't see the fruit. Keep praying. Are you going to keep praying? No. I'm thinking about giving up, actually. Where is your faith? Is it a vending machine kind of God? You've slotted in your rosaries and nothing has come out yet? Kick the machine. Is it just give it a bit of a shake? See if or do we just give up? Or do you persevere in faith, and then decades later, it's all answered. But then not just answered, right? But answered like 100-fold in superabundance. Her husband converts, her mother-in-law converts, and St. Augustine becomes a priest and a bishop and a saint and a doctor of the church. So, as I said, from where she is now, she doesn't regret for a second any of the things, of the prayers, of the sacrifices that she made. It makes sense when we get to heaven. And I think we can apply that to us too. Our sacrifices and our sufferings, they're not pleasant here. Of course, they're not. The cross remains a cross. But they do make sense from heaven. And maybe we have the grace to see how they make sense from here. Maybe there's someone to guide us or show us even how on this side of eternity our cross bears fruit. The Cure of Ars used to say, if you carry your cross will carry you to heaven. And maybe even here, as I say, we can see how certain difficulties and adversities, how they taught us virtue, how they taught us perseverance, how they even taught us to love. It's interesting how kids, for example, children, without realizing it, they teach their parents how to love at a deeper level. When you're there wrecked, tired, and you're up for the second or third time at night, changing a nappy or feeding, and then you have to head into work. You still have to work, and you're heading in, and you're absolutely exhausted, and then you come home, and there's 2 or 3 kids who have decided to take up musical instruments. One is playing drums, One is playing the violin, which is an instrument straight out of hell. When you're learning the violin, okay, that instrument is not from heaven. So drums and violin, and the tin whistle, you can't really get it that wrong because there's only 6 notes. But still, you can still squawk a fair bit, and or just hold on to it, just blow, as we all did when we were kids. So you come home after a hard day, after a long night, and the kids are playing their instruments, and it's like, Daddy, 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 listen to this. Oh. Like it's beautiful, son. It's beautiful. Thank you. Wow. And you head off into another evening of noise and helping them with their homework. And then, okay, guys, can you all get to bed? And yeah, we get to bed. It's 8:30, and then 2 come down at 9:30. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. Can you try? Did you try lying down yet? Can you just go to bed and sleep? I can't sleep. And then 3 o'clock in the morning, I need to. Well, sorry, we know how things are in our families, how kids have no trouble describing exactly what they need to do in the bathroom. And that's it. That's only 2 nights in a row. 2. And there can be years of that. It's amazing. I have the greatest respect for parents. I really do. But without realizing it, they're learning virtue. They're learning selflessness. They're learning to give, and to give every drop that they have. But they learn to love, you know. And so, even though it's tiring, it's exhausting at the time, what emerges from it, what's born from it, is a loving heart that actually knows greater depths of love than it even experienced through intimacy, because it learns a love that sacrifices itself. All these things, as I say, they make sense from our perspective of eternity, but as I say, I think we can get glimpses of it here too. And that's important. We need them in order to persevere. If I'm not 100% sure, or if I'm not sure at all that my prayer, my sacrifice has any meaning, it's very, very easy to believe that lie, that our prayer doesn't make a difference at all. That our prayer is just superstition, or it's just the opium of the simple. And so, Lord Jesus, today, through the prayers of Saint Monica, we ask you to grant us that great grace of perseverance in prayer, so that even when we don't see the fruit immediately, even when we feel like it's a waste of time, even when it's years, maybe even decades, and we're still praying and don't see it yet, that we will continue to persevere in faith, knowing that whatever we give you, you give us back 100-fold. When St. Monica was near her death, she said to St. Augustine, "Son, nothing in this world now affords me any delight. I do not know what there is now left for me to do here, or why I'm still here. All my hopes in this world are now fulfilled." May this be our prayer too, that at the end of our lives, everything we've prayed for, we'll see fulfilled. May we persevere daily in prayer. Amen.